small plane, 2 men, and a mission that was not only life-threatening but seems completely impossible today, the strange dream of a Las Vegas hotel owner to keep an airplane in the air, not for hours, not for days, but for months without touching the ground. Here, it wasn't just a matter of fuel. This is a story of sleep deprivation, the cold of December, and maintaining a delicate balance between life and death. But the question is, did these 2 pilots really manage to break this seemingly impossible record, or did their plane vanish forever into the blue sky? An unusual event in history that has been lost somewhere in books. Viewers, in 1956, a man named Warren Bailey opened a hotel in Las Vegas that was quite different from the city's other large casinos and hotels because it attracted simple, rural folks. This hotel, named Hacienda, wasn't very expensive, which is why ordinary people preferred to visit it. But because the profit was quite low, Warren Bailey kept thinking of new ideas to promote his hotel. One day, his friend Bob Timm, an Army pilot, suggested that breaking a world record could significantly promote Hacienda. He was hinting at flying a plane that could stay airborne for not just days, but months without touching the ground. Warren found the idea quite appealing, but he wondered if it would really be able to promote the hotel, and more importantly, how it would be possible. It's important to understand that when the airplane was first invented, its flight time was recorded in seconds. For pilots and mechanics, the crucial thing was how long an airplane could stay airborne. Over time, airplanes became more advanced and their flight time increased. Eventually, the limiting factor became the fuel tank size, meaning the larger the fuel tank, the longer the flight time. In 1923, the US Army solved this issue by refueling one plane in mid-air from another plane. After that, the first endurance flight record was immediately broken. The first world record was set by a DH-4B plane, which flew continuously for 37 hours by refueling in mid-air 9 times. This initiated a new trend of breaking world records. America had caught the fever of endurance flights, and in 1929 alone, this record was broken 5 times. However, by the time the WAP team was presenting this idea to Warren, the craze for this world record had significantly diminished. This was because it was no longer about the limits of the aircraft's engine or fuel tank, but rather about testing the physical limits of humans. The WAP team was talking about breaking a world record set in 1949 by 2 Navy pilots who kept an aircraft named Iran Sedan in the air for 46 days, and their purpose was highly highlighted in the media. The owner of Hacienda, Warren Bailey, found this idea quite appealing for promoting his hotel and requested the WAP team to undertake this mission, as Bob Timm was, after all, a well-known World War II pilot. Timm first went to McCarran Field Airport, where he bought a Cessna 172 aircraft and hired a mechanic to modify the plane for an endurance flight. The first thing they did was remove the co-pilot seat, because if Timm was to stay in the air for more than a month, he would definitely need a co-pilot as well. And both pilots would fly the plane in shifts. One pilot would take control while the other would sleep on a foam pad placed in the co-pilot's spot. They also removed the bench from the back row, creating an 8 square feet storage space to store essential supplies. And a small sink was also fitted in one corner of the cabin so that occasionally a sponge bath could be taken in the 4-foot-high cabin. After that, they installed a 95-gallon belly tank to have an extra fuel tank in addition to the plane's wings. An electric winch was also installed in this belly tank to refuel during flight, which will be able to pull up the fuel pipe. They removed the co-pilot's door and replaced it with a folding door, providing easy access to the fuel port of the belly tank. In today's era, hanging from a flying plane can only be seen in movies. But in that era, it was a common occurrence. Even up until the 1950s, aerial stuntmen performed many scenes where they had to move from one plane to another during flight. To make refueling as safe as possible, a small, foldable platform was built outside the co-pilot's door so that one could stand on it and connect the pipe to the belly tank's port. This platform was the only place on the plane where one could stand upright. Otherwise, inside the Cessna 172, there was only space to sit or lie down. They also made several changes to the plane's engine and wrote Hacienda in large letters on the outside of the plane, which was the most important objective of the entire mission. Now it was time for test flights. In the summer of 1958, the test flights began. But problems started arising one after another. Timm had initially hired a co-pilot, but the two did not get along. During the test flights, they often disagreed with each other over various issues. The first test flight failed, the second also failed, and during the third, they had such a dispute that Timm fired the co-pilot from the job. The problem was with the plane's engine exhaust valve, which kept overheating. They launched the mission 3 times but failed miserably. Moreover, while they were conducting their unsuccessful test flights to set a new world record, at the same time, Jim Heath over Dallas and pilots named Jim Heath and Bill Burkhardt had successfully set a new world record by staying in the air for 50 days on the same Cessna 172 aircraft. The team resolved all the plane's issues by December, and finally, on December 4th, 1958, Hacienda took off from McCarran Field for their 4th attempt. At that time, officials from the International Federation of Automobiles, or FAI, were also present, monitoring the mission. To avoid allegations of fraud, the team and its new co-pilot, John Cook, took off and returned to the runway so that a special white paint could be applied to the plane's tires. If they attempted to land secretly somewhere, this white paint would come off, and the world record would be invalidated. After 12 hours, when it was time for the first refueling, they arrived over a predetermined road where a refueling truck was already present. As soon as the plane aligned with the road, the truck driver parked to floored the accelerator. At that time, the plane had to fly at its minimum speed, which was 100 kilometers per hour, because the truck couldn't go any faster. When the plane came just 20 feet above the truck and both were aligned, the co-pilot dropped a winch down. The workers in the truck attached a pipe to the winch, and then the winch was pulled back up. This pipe was connected to the port of the belly tank, and then the truck was signaled to turn on the fuel pump. For the next 3 minutes, the plane and the truck were perfectly side by side. During this time, if there was even a small mistake or if the speed of either one decreased or increased, the result would have been nothing short of death. When the belly tank was filled, the co-pilot removed the pipe and threw it back down, and they took off into the sky again for the next 12 hours. If they wanted to break the 50-day world record, this process would have to be repeated at least 100 times. Timm and Cook continued flying over Las Vegas for a few days so that if there was any issue with the plane, a landing strip would be nearby. But when everything seemed fine, they also started spending a considerable amount of time over the deserted fields of California. At higher altitudes, fuel efficiency improves, but the temperature also drops to freezing. Due to modifications in the doors of the Hacienda, its insulation was no longer good. So to avoid the cold, they decided to fly closer to the ground. At low altitudes, the views are indeed beautiful, but at night, mountains and clouds can also prove to be deadly. Both pilots had developed a good friendship by now, spending their free time reading books, exercising, and chatting. Taking advantage of refueling twice a day, they would not only pull up fuel, but also other necessary items such as water containers, engine oil, and food prepared by Chef Hacienda. You might be wondering where the food they ate eventually went, meaning where did they use the toilet? They had a folding camp toilet seat in the plane, under which a waste bag was attached. They would actually empty this plastic bag filled with waste over the deserted fields of California. They never disclosed this themselves, but it was revealed by the co-pilot's wife after his death. Now, Timm and Cook had spent 36 days in the air. They even spent their New Year's Eve in the plane, but the effects of fatigue and tension were beginning to show. They were facing a lot of discomfort in the small plane cabin, and the noise of the plane engine was also affecting their sleep. One night, it happened that Timm fell asleep while sitting at the controls, and this occurred but just a few minutes before the start of the co-pilot's shift. Amazingly, for the next hour, Timm did not wake up and the plane continued to fly straight on autopilot. When Timm woke up, the plane was flying at a low altitude inside a canyon in an unknown location. If Timm hadn't woken up for a few more minutes, the plane would have crashed into a mountain because the autopilot's responsibility was only to keep the plane straight, not to avoid obstacles. On January 12th, which was day 39, a serious problem occurred in the plane. The plane's generator failed, meaning that now the radio, lights, heater, and the system to pump fuel from the belly tank to the wings would not work. The ground crew sent up a small wind turbine, but it could only generate enough electricity to keep the radios running. In the remaining days, the fuel had to be pumped manually by hand. Due to the lack of lights, the refueling process at night became very difficult, especially when there was a new moon. They solved this problem by attaching a flashlight to the winch so that the ground crew could see where to attach the pipe, and a second truck with a searchlight was driven 300 feet ahead of the refueling truck. Now the problems began to increase day by day. The plane's fuel gauge broke, the tachometer failed, and carbon started to build up in the engine as the time to break the record approached on January 23rd. Hacienda finally started to receive the publicity that Hacienda's owner, Bailey, was hoping for. Bailey arranged a schedule to fly over every major city, Popombi, and had it published in newspapers so that people could see the plane, Haiti, and cover this historic moment. Once he even sent an entire separate plane filled with photographers, which flew alongside Hacienda and managed to capture some memorable pictures. To make this moment even more remarkable, co-pilot Cook pretended to clean the windshield by stepping out of the plane. Newspapers published this picture, and the entire country began to focus on this historic flight. On January 23rd at 3:52 p.m., Hacienda broke the 50-day record it had set. But given the effort and challenges they faced in breaking this record, Timm and Cook decided that they would not land for the time being and would continue as long as possible. In this way, they spent an additional 14 days in the air. Finally, the plane was no longer capable of flying any further. On February 7, 1959, after staying in the air for a total of 64 days, 22 hours, 19 minutes, and 5 seconds, they finally requested landing permission from the McCarran Field Control Tower and landed the plane. At the time of landing, a crowd of press was gathered, and people from all over the country came to the airport to witness this historic moment. This included supporters, record officials, journalists, Timm's wife and children, and the entire staff of the Hacienda Hotel. Timm and Cook were in such bad condition that they were not even able to get off the plane on their own. Officials also confirmed that the white tire paint was completely intact, meaning the plane truly remained in the air for 64 days without landing. In 2015, the FAI officially discontinued piloted endurance records because the risk of loss of life was increasing, meaning Timm and Cook's world record will now remain unbreakable forever. The Cessna 172, in which this world record was set, is still hanging in the baggage claim area of Terminal 1 at McCarran International Airport, telling its story to people today. Thank you very much for your loving comments. See you in the next amazing video.